We certainly do appreciate the presence of everybody tonight. We do have some kind of nasty weather out there, and so we appreciate you braving the elements and coming to be with us that we might continue in our study of the book of Ezekiel. The first couple of lessons that we've looked at in the book of Ezekiel have primarily been focused on making sure that we had some recall of the historical background that takes us into the study of Ezekiel. We've looked at the kings that were in power. We've reviewed the fall of Jerusalem, the captivity, and Ezekiel being one that was taken in that captivity and relocated over along the river Chebar in the Babylonian resettlement in the kingdom of Babylon, and that he is now going to be called to be a preacher, shall we say, among the people of God. He is going to serve as a prophet to help them remember that God is with them and to help them understand their need to follow him. We're going to be looking tonight at his call to be a prophet, and we are then going to look at the message and the purpose that God sets before him as he gets busy in his job in starting to work with the people. And so in lesson 3 of our workbook study, we find that Ezekiel is, as we'll notice here in just a second in terms of age, he is about 30 years old, which would put him at the age of where he would, under normal circumstances, be willing or ready to start working at the temple as a priest, because after all, that was his background. As a priest of God, he was of that tribe. He had an obligation or an opportunity to work in that regard, but they're not around the temple anymore. Now they're in captivity in a foreign land. And instead of training and working in that area, God calls him to be a prophet. Now, can you imagine going through your daily routine, doing all of the things that you were able to do in the situation where you found yourself, adjusting to your new surroundings, thinking of how you could serve God, striving to make sense out of everything that's happened, and then you have communication from God. I think about how that must have shocked and overwhelmed Abraham in the age of the patriarchs. When God talks to him, it's like, who? What? Who's talking? To understand what God gave as instruction to him. Well, we find that there is a big explosive kind of revelation to Ezekiel that you have been chosen to be a prophet of mine, to work among this rebellious people and remind them of my ways. And this is a very overwhelming kind of experience. The visions that he has, the things that God says, the role that he is called to play. When Moses was spoken to from the burning bush, it had been a kind of an overwhelming experience, and he began to make excuses to why he wasn't the right guy for the job. But you're talking with God, and God doesn't really take no for an answer whenever he has made the choice and knows the fiber of the person that he's talking to and knows the things that he intends for them to be able to fulfill. As we look here at the opening of Ezekiel Chapter 1, it said, "Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, that as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiad's captivity. And the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him." Whenever we look at this introduction, And then if we look, as we'll look at the unfolding of the rest of the verses in this first, second, and third chapter, the author kind of divides this into about 3 different sections, basically. This is kind of his approach to handling these verses. And we find him saying that the first thing that's going to happen here, and we'll be reading some of the detail of it, is that God gives him quite a vision. And in this vision, he begins to see majestic things. He sees, the doors of heaven open in a sense, and he realizes this is something special, something fantastic, something overwhelming. But God gets his attention through the visions that he experiences. And then another part of the unfolding of this would be God's giving him the commission to be the watchman to Israel, to be a spokesperson. He said, they may or they may not listen to you, for after all, this is a rebellious and stubborn nation. And so your job is to simply let them know that a prophet of God is among them, that I've not ignored my people, that I have not forsaken my people, and my word is still to be obeyed. You are to do the things I have commanded you to do. Some will listen, most probably will not. But then he tells to Ezekiel over in the third chapter, the third section of this division, saying, but your job, Ezekiel, is to act as a watchman. You are to be the beacon that sounds forth my words to the people. And your job is to say what I tell you to say. Now, if you tell them what to do, and they follow your word and behave righteously, then indeed they will be blessed. But if you fail, if you give them word and they don't obey it, then their blood will be upon their head. He said, now if you talk to the wicked and tell them what they should do, and the wicked fail to turn from their way, then they will be punished for their error and for their wickedness. But what would happen if Ezekiel kept his mouth shut? All right, they would perish, but he would also require their blood at his hand if he failed to say what he was supposed to say. It was like the watchman that did not give warning when danger was approaching. It'll be on your head. And so with such a sobering admonition, Ezekiel realizes, I can't sit still and be quiet. I'm going to be bound by God to carry forth the message amongst these exiles and say the things that God once said. Now, as we notice here in the very first verse, it says it was in the 30th year. Many scholars take that to mean that Ezekiel was about 30 years old, which is where I tend to come down on that. But that's not a unanimous view. Some say it's a reference back to since they had been kept from the very beginnings of their captivity and other such. It's a relative time frame. It is simply acknowledged that this is where Ezekiel would be during the core of the period of captivity, and he was there to be this watchman, this spokesman, to talk to the people of God and to help them to see what God wanted them to do. This was an overwhelming experience. You can just imagine the things that would be going through your head. Why me? And how am I going to do this? And am I up to the task? And can I do it right? And on such thoughts could go through your head. And if we search through these first 3 chapters, how long did it take Ezekiel to get over the trauma of this experience? A good week. We go over to the 3rd chapter and going down to verse 15. Then I came to them of the captivity in Tel Aviv that dwelt by the river of Chebar, And I sat where they sat, and remained there astonished among them 7 days. He kind of zoned out and was simply caught up in handling and processing all of these things that had been said, all of these things he was commissioned to do, and the kind of work and lifestyle that he was going to have ahead of him in this work. Whenever we go back to the beginning of the first chapter, there's 4 different expressions there that kind of highlight the prophet's experience as far as God's revelation to him here by the river Chebar. Just looking at what the author highlighted kind of out of this opening section, we find that the first phrase from verse 1, it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month of the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chebar, that the heavens were open. Here he's not just seeing a burning bush. There may be, am I really seeing what I think I see? But God is delivering a very powerful vision to him that, shall we say, kind of takes him to a whole new plane. And not only does he see that the heavens were open, but continuing on, he said, I saw what? He said, I saw visions of God. He said, I saw things that nobody else in my family's ever seen. I saw things that the rest of this nation hasn't seen. I saw an angelic setting, a heavenly setting, in which I saw visions of God. Moving on as we continue with what he's saying here. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest. God had something to say. It was Ezekiel's job to sit up and take note. Many individuals, without all of these other fantastic events, could have heard a voice from God and tried to ignore it. I must have been dreaming. But with all these other things that went along with it, Ezekiel realized who he was talking to, and realized he was being called out for a special job, being called out for a special mission. And how was he going to find the strength to be able to do all of this? What's the latter part of verse 3 tell us in this last phrase? All right. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel, and the hand of the Lord was upon him. He realized this was legit. He realized that God was going to be there to strengthen and to watch what he did. And everything about his success would be dependent upon God strengthening him. It wasn't because Ezekiel was chosen because he was the smartest man among the captives. He wasn't chosen because he was the most eloquent speaker or the most effective man in this community. This was God's choice. God had work for him to do, and God was giving him the assurance, you are going to be able to do it. Now, this isn't the first time that whenever you see a prophet being called to a major work, especially against the kind of odds that Ezekiel is facing, he's not the first that's had these great visions as God's revealed himself and purposely shown him that this is a big-time job and this is what I want you to do. Who would be another prophet that we recently studied that also had this kind of experience of God? In his case, it was like putting a hot coal to his lips and saying, you're going to know what to say and I'm going to strengthen you with all of that. Isaiah. Isaiah was one prophet who had a major encounter with God in which God kind of unloaded on him your work, and I'm going to help you with this, and it's going to be a hard job, but do what I tell you to do because I'll be there to strengthen you. There was also a New Testament writer who was suffering tremendously because of the proclamations he'd made for the gospel. But as he began to write a prophetic book in the New Testament, also there was a throne scene and a heavenly vision that was given to him as he started out his writing. Who was that? John. In the opening chapters of Revelation, we find that John is able to see this throne scene, and it's overwhelming, the great majesty and glory that is there, and the awe that that creates within these individuals is also parallel then to what Ezekiel is experiencing as he has this introductory vision of God and the things that were to transpire. Now, let's kind of summarize a little bit what this vision was that he had. In other words, he's in a normal type of situation, going about his daily business, I would suppose, and suddenly God commands his attention, and he begins to see some pretty magnificent things. What was the beginning of that vision? All right, there was a major storm or disturbance. You know, as we go down to verse 4, and I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself. And a brightness was about it out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber out of the midst of the fire. In other words, he sees the dark storm clouds, but there's fire shooting out of those storm clouds, and there is that amber glow as though there is a great fire burning within these storm clouds. And then what's the next thing that he sees that certainly would be unusual? All right. There are 4 cherubim that appear, 4 creatures that are there. In verses 5 and 6, also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and everyone had 4 faces, and everyone had 4 wings. All right, as we begin to talk about the cherubims, you have a difference, interestingly enough. I noted it in one commentary reference. The seraphim that are sometimes cited in Scripture had 6 wings. These are defined in other parts of the book as cherubim, and they have 4 wings. But these 4 living creatures appear, they have at first the likeness of a man, but they have 4 faces, front, back, side to side, and each one of those faces is symbolic of different things. We look at it as a grotesque image out of a horror show or something, but the imagery that's being used here is to show more the abilities, the all-seeing nature of these creatures, the various abilities of strength that they had, that they were of God and doing His bidding. All of these are attributes that go in conjunction with these 4 faces. Everyone had 4 wings, their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their foot was like the sole of a calf's hoof, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. And they had the hands of a man under their wings and on their 4 sides, and the 4 sides had faces and their wings. Kind of the image we're using of the number 4 here, sometimes we use the notion of like the 4 corners of the earth to express completeness. And that's what's happening here. You know, it's hard to take an angelic being that could be one that could change form instantaneously. How do you ascribe to that same being all these forms that you're seeing? So it's the best presentation possible to explain the power and the disposition of these creatures. Their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went. They went every one straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, the four had the face of a man, the face of a lion on the right side, and they four had the face of an ox on the left side, and they four also had the face of an eagle. And you think about the attributes of the ox and of the eagle and of the man and of the lion, and there's lots of attributes that we can read into this to help us understand, as is so common with prophecy, that we're not all caught up in the details of, how could I draw that? What would that really look like? But rather to follow the symbolisms that are here, to be able to understand the greatness of these creatures and the role that they had to play. But once you get beyond the description of these powerful creatures, what's the next part of this vision? The wheels. Beneath them were wheels. And you can see the rim, you can see the inside of these wheels. Going down to about verse 15. Now as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel was upon the earth by the living creatures with his four faces. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of beryl. And they four had one likeness in their appearance, and the work was, as it were, a wheel in the middle of a wheel. Almost like the rim and axle, or the axle inside of the rim of a wheel. And basically, from my kind of estimation of the thing, it's almost looking like four wheels and also one great wheel in the middle. But anyway, the idea that carries with this is that it's moving what could symbolically be talked about. I think the author makes some comment using the term Merkah, the idea of it being almost like a divine chariot in a sense, a vehicle of locomotion. And then in addition to the wheels underneath, going down to verse 26, there is also a platform up above it, and above the firmament that was over the heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire throne, and upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness of the appearance of a man above upon it. And I saw as the color of amber, and as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of his loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward. I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about. In other words, he's not able, in the course of his limited vocabulary, I'm not able to see the face of God. Here it is, this fiery image of a man. But the details are blurred out. But this one is sitting upon a sapphire throne. Rainbow over the head. And you can see this majestic image that is unlike anything that an artist has drawn or that any craftsman has fashioned. It's totally different and unique. And so the author goes through and he makes some, what I felt were rather random deductions from this as to what some of the things may have represented. I'm not sure that, he might be spot on with all of this. There's lots of things that could be said about such a majestic image and what this aspect of it could mean and what that aspect of it might stand for. But, he talks about simply the transcendence of God, the idea that he is over all. This is something greater than anything that Ezekiel could ever have imagined or ever have created himself. It is certainly powerful and beyond human construction. It is something that is amazing in every sense of the word. It is also radiating power, giving the idea of the universal sovereignty of God. But the shocking aspect of it could also be that Ezekiel is seeing this all the way over in Babylon. This isn't one of those local phenomenon that was like the pillar of fire or some other things that had been with the Israelites in the past, and other illustrations of grandeur and God's power as it was seen in the tabernacle and then later seen in the temple. This is all the way over Babylon. But God is there too. But this is an image that isn't of a tranquil nature. You know, it doesn't have that kumbaya, peace and safety, isn't life wonderful air in this description. Everything about it is magnificent, but it also is fire and energy and direction and movement, and it's God and his judgments. That he knew where all things were going as opposed to man, and that through this image there is a lot of things that could be said about Ezekiel's image and what God is radiating here in this manifestation to Ezekiel. Any other comments and observations as we go through here? Yeah, Joe? Right. That's right. To try and peg it down and say, well, this is what that means, when one person's guess is as good as another, quite truthfully. Right?
The point that God said, I'm with you in Babylon, too. There are times in our life we get ourselves in situations where very lonely, very desolate. God is there, too. He's not just in the church building over here.
Right.
He's with us everywhere.
That's right. And to a nation that was as displaced as these Jews were, who were now captives as opposed to being free citizens, their lives had been turned upside down, and they were trying to make some sense out of it. You know, until they are made aware that this was the consequence of their sin, which the prophets had been saying over and over and over again, that message was falling on deafened ears, and they were wanting to spin it around and say it's because God's forsaken us. And God walked away, and look at the mess we're in. Then?
We were just looking at what Jeremiah had to say, and he warned them and kept talking, and they wouldn't listen. And now we're coming in behind there. And it really, it's a powerful message that God, and it really comes back to what Lane's saying there, that God still sees them. Even though God is sending them up to punishment, God still cares. And he's sending the message on. He knows he plans on bringing this remnant, faithful remnant back. And he's given Ezekiel this message to tell them whether they listen or not. But maybe some of them will listen on being part of that faithful remnant. But God has not given up on them. And I was thinking too, as we've been talking the last couple weeks, looking at this, the message really is to the rebellious people. But there were some that were like Ezekiel, who really have got kind of fleshed in with everybody else. And they just made this terrible march captive to nearly 1,000 miles away in this foreign land, and it was bound to seem like just a hopeless thing. And here God cares enough to send this message that I see you.
That's right.
I'm still with you, and I still care.
And that gives the seed of hope. That this, just as the prophets had said, this is only going to be a 70-year ordeal, and then you're going to get to go back home. But there are some definite changes that need to take place during this time that you are sojourning here. In question 8, why would the children of Israel not listen to Ezekiel and obey his voice? What were they compared to?
Their father.
All right. And in general, if we go down to chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, he said to me, Son of man, I send thee to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation, and hath rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me even to this very day. It isn't just this generation. They've had a heritage of all of this. For they are impudent children and stiff-hearted. I do send thee unto them, and thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God. They were rebellious children. And oftentimes when you start dealing with someone even today who is of a delinquency disposition, they often have a very stiff lip, so to speak. They grit their teeth, and I'll take whatever you dish out, I can handle it, and you can't tell me anything because you don't know, and there is just this wall that is built. And even as you try to counsel and as you try to give advice and as you try to help them make better decisions, they're angry. And they are so sure that they know what's right and that they've done what's right and that there's justification for all of their actions. And so why are you saying I'm in trouble? Because I did what was right. Y'all are the ones who are making all these stupid rules. And so there is that rejection, that fighting back against the instruction of the Heavenly Father. And so using that imagery here of their being like rebellious children, impudent and stiff-hearted, hard-headed would be another synonym that would fit in there, fits pretty well. In question 9, why was Ezekiel's mission unpleasant? What was going to be the challenge with this?
They were going to talk back.
All right.
With hard words and terrible looks.
All right. He was going to suffer rejection, and it was going to be a battle. In many respects, he would be accused of all kinds of things. His motivations would be misconstrued. There would be harsh words. There would be a disdain for who does he think he is, and so all of this would sting pretty hard. Ezekiel was not going to be reverenced and obeyed. Jeremiah had not been either, but it was still required to get the message out there. And so in the course of this, in chapter 2, we find going down about verse 9, and when I looked, behold, a hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein. And he spread it before me, and it was written within and without. And there was written within lamentations and mournings and woe. He sees a scroll is handed to him. What is he to do with it? He is supposed to eat it. Was it good? Yep, tasted like honey. It was filled with God's words. God was telling him what he wanted him to say. And so then in chapter 3 and going down to verse 14, so the Spirit lifted me up and took me away, and I went in bitterness in the heat of my spirit, but the hand of the Lord was strong upon me. What does it mean to be in bitterness in the heat of the Spirit? All right, he had also picked up on this indignation. He was passionate, kind of fired up about the work that was his to do, even though he knew it was going to be hard to be completed. In question 12, what are the important features of Ezekiel's responsibility as a watchman? Well, of course, as we've mentioned, is to warn the wicked in order to deliver his soul. In question 13, how does this relate to our responsibility to warn the wicked today? It's still for us. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort is what Paul told Timothy to do in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 2. And so Ezekiel then is confined to his house, and he's not able to speak. What is the purpose of that? All right. There was a lot that the Lord had to say. There was a lot in getting him ready for the work that was ahead. He was basically being positioned somewhat as an oracle. He was going to be the spokesperson that was going to share forth to the nation the ways of God. And so that takes us up through the first 3 chapters of Ezekiel, and we'll pick up with that next lesson next week. Do appreciate all your comments.